Welcome to the All Ambient podcast, where we dig into the creative process, hear untold stories, and explore the brilliant minds behind some of the finest ambient music out there. I'm your host, Mike Graff. I'm excited to be in this together with you. Let's get going. Here it is, folks, a music news edition of the All Ambient podcast. This is something that we have been doing in some way, shape, or form in a lot of the longer roundtable episodes on the All Ambient podcast. But we wanted to put a little bit more emphasis on, give it its own weight, its own opportunity to grow, and to chew through some of the things that are going on currently in the music industry at large that applies to not just a singular genre or a singular platform or anything like that. Even if we talk about specifics, it really does apply to the creative journey as a whole. All right, let's not wait any longer. Let's get right into today's episode. Hey everybody, welcome to another music news edition of the All Ambient podcast. It is great to be here together with Marshall, with Kirk, and with Ben. Guys, thanks for being here.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having us.
Hello.
It's gonna be good. So there's always a bunch of fun stuff going on in the world of music. This particular bit of news was one that I wasn't even necessarily expecting to have happen, but there's been a quote from a certain streaming service executive, and then the response to it is almost like perfectly what you would have imagined it to be. And it's almost a caricature of itself. And I really resonate with the response to it, but also it feels like maybe we're missing the point a little bit of what the conversation's supposed to be about. So anyway, let's talk. This is what Daniel Ek posted on X/Twitter/ whatever you'd like to call it. Today, with the cost of creating content, and again, like when he says content, we are talking about the guy who runs Spotify. So we can assume that he's referring in a large part to music. But today, with the cost of creating content being close to zero, people can share an incredible amount of content. This has sparked my curiosity about the concept of long shelf life versus short shelf life. While much of what we see and hear quickly becomes obsolete, there are timeless ideas and even pieces of music that can remain relevant for decades or centuries. For example, we're witnessing a resurgence of Stoicism, with many of Marcus Aurelius's insights still resonating thousands of years later. This makes me wonder, what are the most unintuitive yet enduring ideas that aren't frequently discussed today, but might have a long shelf life? Also, what are we creating now that will still be valued and discussed hundreds or thousands of years from today? So you read the whole 2-paragraph thing and okay, that's kind of an interesting question on what is the shelf life of something that just gets put out on the internet or whatever? Is it going to live for seconds or for hours, or might this be what is the difference between something that disappears and something that endures for centuries or millennia or that? But of course, I don't know if anyone even made it to the end of the second paragraph, because all you need to do is get 4 words into his second sentence. Right. No, the first sentence, 4 words into the beginning of the whole thing. With the cost of creating content being close to zero, and people can create an incredible amount of content, the world goes bat crazy when they hear the CEO of the company that, I admit, they've been trying to figure out streaming revenue and how people don't go into crazy debt and all that stuff for years. But for the first quarter, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure that Spotify just posted a profit of $1 billion in the first quarter of 2024. Does anyone want to spot check me on that? Okay, Ben's nodding his head.
That's correct.
That is correct. Cool.
Wow.
So for someone who is helming a music company that just posted $1 billion profit, a 10-figure profit, for him to say that the cost of creating content, of creating music, let's insert music here, is near zero, man, there were people left and right just what is zero about this for you? And I think that's probably where I want to just drop it, and I want to hear a little bit of what you guys have to say, because of course there are people talking about how much equipment costs. There are people talking about how long it takes to learn about music and the education and all this and that. I'm very curious how, let's just start there. How did you guys respond to that? Or maybe this is the first time that you've even heard it, or even just kind of processed through it. Maybe you heard it and you're whatever. But just sitting with it now for a second, what does it do to you? I'm curious.
I'm conflicted because I think the majority, like you said, the majority of what he says in that tweet is it's fine. Like some of those are good questions. I think it's definitely a valid question to ask oneself as an artist. Like, okay, what are we creating? Are we creating something for a moment in time, or are we creating something that our intention is to, how do we kind of make this last a long time? And we're trying to say something that kind of lasts through the ages. I think that's a really valid and good question. I don't like the use of the word, as a lot of artists don't. I don't like the use of the word content when it comes to creative art. I think that's an unhelpful way of terming it, because I think even if it's not intended as such, your mind goes to something like, an Instagram reel or a story or whatever. Like that's in my mind what content is versus some, a piece of music that you've spent a long time making. But I agree. Yes, the cost of making music has significantly decreased over the past 20, 30 years. So yes, it's not close to zero. I think that's an overstatement, but it's a lot less. And none of us would be able to do what we're doing today 30 years ago. We just wouldn't have the technical capacity or the studio time and all of those kind of things. So I don't love what he says. More than that, I don't love some of the recent things that Spotify are doing at the same time as pulling this great profit, because one of the main reasons they're making this profit is because they are kind of diversifying their portfolio away from music. And at the same time, they are squeezing musicians through things like discovery mode, which is now far more far-reaching than it was at its inception. So there's these kind of ways that they're continuing to take from musicians, rather than saying, hey, we've made this significant profit now. Let's see how we can kind of address that in terms of supporting musicians a little more moving forward. So I think they have such a massive opportunity, Spotify, to be artist and musician advocates and be forward looking and be like, okay, how do we support local musicians? How do we support online only musicians? How do we say, hey, we're going to stick up for the smaller independent artists and how they can make a living? That's going to be our metric of success. And instead it feels like they get either into these kind of theoretical questions that really make little difference in terms of your kind of average working artist. Or, Daniel Ek goes and says, hey, I'm going to sponsor the Emirates Stadium and Arsenal's football stadium. They were trying to do that for a while, or whatever it is. It's just like they're just not connected to the real people making Spotify the biggest streaming platform in the world. Yeah. And that for me is the disconnect, more so than specifically his tweet.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and I'm not going to totally cut you off, but there was, I forget what platform it was on. It may have been on Netflix, maybe on Hulu, but there was kind of a 6-part miniseries about how Spotify sort of came together and all this and that. I don't know if I even made it all the way through, but it seemed like each episode sort of had one of the main players in the story of Spotify, and it kind of like focused on their story. But at some point throughout the whatever part of the miniseries I watched, that there was this concept that Spotify was really more of a developer dream. Like it had everything to do with these guys who were geeking out on the back end and trying. It was less about what music, like the value of the music that was going on, and more so about like how fast can we build this in the back end where that song, like within less than a second, like that song is played. Any song that you want, it really has more to do with like the user experience, and they were trying to solve those problems. And again, like that doesn't mean that they didn't care about music, period. But it wasn't stemming from a place of, we love music, how can we bring this forward in a really special way? It was all about like, we're these dev geniuses, which is great. And we're gonna, why don't we try to do something over in this space? And so I don't want to devalue what Spotify has done in the sense of, like catalyzing what we now know as the streaming age for sure, and where it's going to go from here. What I don't want to see, and I've seen people already saying in response to, what's going to be valued and discussed hundreds of thousands of years from today. And it seems like a lot of the public response is, well, if you keep talking the way you do, Daniel Ek, I don't think we're going to care about Spotify in hundreds of years. That's for sure. Just the concept of like, is this going to be about music, or is this going to be about, like corporate profit? Or I thought that was pretty interesting.
Like, not that that's not like a valid question, right? To say like, what are we ultimately leaving as, right? I mean, you could say, what are we leaving as a legacy? Or there's that conversation, but also is the quote, like, I'm sorry, is that really helpful to like start talking about like Marcus Aurelius and all this stuff in the conversation of Spotify? Like, I don't know. That doesn't really seem helpful or relatable in the context of like us as musicians and artists, and
sure.
the fact that, how many songs are uploaded to Spotify a day or whatever it is. Let's not compare that number of songs being uploaded a day to, starting to talk about like Marcus Aurelius's stuff and what are we going to be talking about hundreds of thousands of years from now? And if all those songs, what are they going to look like kind of thing? So talk about a like disconnect. I don't know. So Ben, what you said, I think is just kind of on the nose with everything. It's just, I wouldn't expect anything else really at this point other than, it's out of touch, and that's kind of like unfortunate that's to be expected. Sure. And it's kind of sad, right? Like I would love to see them be able to take advantage of an opportunity that they have to advocate for independent artists the way they could.
Yeah.
That's intriguing to me why they wouldn't do that with the revenue that they have. It would be interesting to see the response that they would get. Right. If they did something like that, kind of the rallying I can imagine that they would receive if they took an opportunity to do that would be interesting to see.
Yeah.
But yeah. And the content thing too, I just want to say what you said about that, Ben, too, is just kind of, it's hard because it's like in a way that kind of is what it has been reduced to, in the sense of like, what is he going to call, he has to call it content because it's the wider part of the conversation.
Yeah.
Spotify, and where is that going to lead? Where is Spotify going, right? Is Spotify, I don't know if there's a specific number or specific like criteria for artists who do this, but there's kind of like little reels on Spotify that certain artists have. I don't want to call them reels, but there's like these little quick video clips and things like that. And yeah, kind of just will be curious to see if it follows that. Will there start to be kind of more quick scrolling, stuff like that? I mean, it's hard to imagine Spotify taking that route as well, but I'm kind of interested to see if that will happen too.
You never know.
Yeah.
Kirk, you got thoughts?
I probably do. I'm taking it in, and do you want to? I've got a couple ideas. If you want, do you want another second or two to kind of gather yours, or you ready to launch? Well, it's not going to get any better, but I'm happy to listen. I'm happy to listen some more. I'm happy to listen some more.
Well, okay, we'll let you back clean up then. I'll go three. So there were some not great things said. I find it, like let's set aside the idea of like here's how much I paid in production fees for my last record, or here, like I get that. I get that anything can cost an exorbitant amount of money if we wanted it to, or you could do something for $5. Like each of us, if someone put a gun to our head and said the next release you have to put out has to be on GarageBand with all stock instruments and stock effects, you don't get to use anything else. Like we all could technically do it. It doesn't mean it would be like our finest realized, creative endeavor, but like we all could make something happen. Like I'm aware of that. So I don't even really care about like trying to be like, how much should the stuff cost or all that. I even don't even care as much about the argument of how long people have studied music or like the cost of like education and all that, because like don't get me wrong, I fully believe in the 10,000 hours. I fully believe in becoming an expert at your craft and all that. But what I wouldn't want to do is I wouldn't want to say that you shouldn't do anything until you've hit a certain stride. Like some of the ways that you learn the best is releasing stuff that is like 3/4 baked, right? Or like earlier in your career, and it almost is by like releasing that you then grow and everybody feels that way. I mean, I was just listening to an interview with John Mayer. It may have been with Rick Rubin, but he was just like, almost like vomiting, overthinking about his first release. He's like, oh, I could barely listen to those. And I'm thinking back on that because those are some of the ones that I was introduced to him through. And I was like, oh my gosh, like those were incredible recordings. Are you kidding? But of course, like from the artist perspective, he needed to do that and then grow from whatever type of response he had to his early art. So anyway, that got long-winded, but cost of education, cost of like production and gear and all that. I'm not even all that interested in the near zero part of the thing. I think it is just the label content. It was the thing that I was just like, man, it feels so, like you said, Marshall, it just feels disconnected. And I think like the place that it put me in mindset wise was that like we have no clear lines, right? Like there is no categorical change where like technically if you were making visual art, clip art on your computer or like Google Images, like clip art is technically a visual art. And also, so are all the masterpieces that are hanging at the local art institute in whatever city any of us live by, you know, the closest one. Like those are both pieces of visual art. Now, where the line, like, I think in this room, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we would all probably say that the clip art could be labeled as, quote, content. But then you look at the thing that's posted in the Institute of Art, and that's a work of art. That's a masterpiece. But like, where is the, like, when does it not become content and becomes something bigger than that? So then you compare that to like kind of what you were saying, Ben, like an Instagram live video or something like that. Like that's technically a video. And then you go to Dune Part 2 or, you know, Mad Max Furiosa or, you know, or something, you know, in the theater, you know, just like this blazing motion picture that took years of development and hundreds of millions of dollars. Like that is also technically a video. And so where is the line of content in that? Like what level of production or what? And so like in the music world, I mean, I think that's also a really interesting question. I mean, there are masterpiece albums that are still being released today by current artists, by legacy artists, by everybody. And then there's so much stuff that falls underneath that, whether it's stuff that's, you know, AI generated or stuff like even, you know, writing pieces for more of a royalty-free license platform that might be more in like the corporate music bed kind of lane. Like those aren't even bad things to create, but that might have more of a content label versus, you know, like the latest, you know, whatever Coldplay release, you know, Beyonce release, the latest, you know, just name your music figurehead and, you know, their latest thing. You probably wouldn't call the latest album by one of them content, like Paul McCartney's, you know, continued work. Like he's not putting out content, right? But what is that line? And I think, I don't know, that's kind of where I get lost because I'm the guy who always looks at stuff sideways anyway. But I think it might say something, if I were to make some assumptions, I think it might say something about how much Eck knows about the stuff that shows up on the platform. And out of those 70,000 songs that get released a day, like how much of that is just pure generated garbage, or how much of it is stuff that really will never see the light of day and is just thrown in the ring to hopefully maybe spike an algorithm or something for a second and grab a little this and that, versus people who are pouring love and time and effort and blood, sweat, tears into this art form. I think maybe it might say something about how big those percentages are and how it might actually be kind of a problem that we've created just in how easy it is to just hit the publish button and send anything off. How many people are just trying to grab at that versus how many artists are really creating stuff. That might be part of the equation. But anyway, I probably just made the whole conversation more convoluted and complicated by that. But yeah, that's sort of where I got stuck when I was thinking of all that. But
that's really good.
You want to guide us home, Kirk?
Sure. That was kind of helpful. I mean, it was helpful. I think in the end, one thing you were talking about is content and art and what's the difference and where's the line. I'm kind of thinking out loud, but I imagine the line is the intent of the artist. So what is their intent with this work that they're doing? You know, because you think of somebody like, what's his face, Banksy, and he goes and it's like a stencil, but it's a stencil, you know, I don't know if it's a stencil or how he does it or whatever, but it's this black and white picture that is pretty and it takes skill. It's not the Mona Lisa or whatever, and it's kind of pops up everywhere. But the intent is what makes it profound.
Yeah.
Right? Or you could have somebody who does a spoken word thing on a TikTok and it took them, you know, 20 seconds to do it, but the words that they did, you know, it's profound, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or you have Bob Dylan, took him 10 minutes to write Blowing in the Wind. And the song is still, you know, it still echoes. Yep. And so it is his, and it took probably, you know, millions of dollars to get it out to the world, but it was 10 minutes of creativity. Yeah. Whether he was like, this would be a fun little thing to do. Was it content when he was doing it? Was it just something to pass the time? Was it intent? Was it the muse? You know, it's like, I think sometimes we probably take ourselves too seriously with what we're doing. And then sometimes we don't understand the value of something, no matter how small or how large it is. It's like out of touch is definitely the right word. And I wonder if this was like a pre-written thing and you have to I have to use the word content because we're trying to position ourselves as a content company.
Yeah,
we're trying to
music
move into
and
this
podcasts and audiobooks
and audiobooks, and now we're sneaking in some clips, and we want to get the videos, and some of it comes from a place of wanting to give people the best experience, which is kind of what they come from. Is how do we, because the value of music at the time that they started was zero.
Yeah,
that's another thing. I always try to come back to give them some credit. It's like the value of music was zero because it was just like free reign, free music, Sure. And so it's like they were trying to create a product to solve a problem, to bring value to music. And it has successfully done it to a large degree and overtaken physical sales. And it's created a mechanism of distribution that was impossible for 98% of people in the world who wanted to do music to even think about. And even the ones who did get to think about it got 7% of the said thing, and the labels got the rest, So it was like there was already a terrible thing before we even showed up. And now there's something that's at least, trying to do something, but obviously it's created by people. And so there's going to be a lot of badness to it also. So it's a complicated thing, but I think the near zero and the content, those are two trigger words that probably have not paid off well for him. If you're trying to expand your company, then you can't just say music.
Yeah.
But the near zero, if you're pulling in $1 billion, then the amount of money it took to make a single is going to be a lot nearer to zero than the quarter profits.
Yeah, it's true.
So I get that. But it's also, it's like maybe say, it's a lot more accessible than it was in the past. You could say something like that. And that probably would have.
You would have sounded like somebody who cared, Kirk. You would have sounded like somebody who cared.
Or and understood. Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like I need to add one more thing about the cost thing, though.
As you're surrounded by a bazillion awesome synths, right?
And that is when I think about our friends who are touring musicians who make their money and make their living traveling and being away from their families. And I feel, if you're going to say that like the cost is almost zero when the cost to them is missing their kids' birthdays and not picking them up from school and having to watch them grow up on FaceTime so that they can barely make money to try and provide to their family. Like it's almost insulting to say that to them, We're lucky enough that we're living in this time that we get to do this from home. So, I mean, if you're talking about the cost in that sense, it's not great. I mean, I'm sure it doesn't come across great to someone who's not making great money as it is from Spotify. It's hard to make money, touring more now than of course it was before Spotify, So, I mean, the cost of that is great, so there's that aspect of it.
Well, and he's the executive at a big company, right? Like as much as I want to romanticize like the guy who runs, a pretty significant music streaming platform to be someone who really, really loves music, like that's cute. Like that would be great. But the reality of him on point of that, like maybe that's kind of a high ask of me to be like, well, he totally should be like, you got to identify with that. Like, I hope he has somebody around him that does identify so that the ship can be steered a little bit. But I mean, he's trying to keep the ship afloat. He's not necessarily trying to figure out the next trend in what's happening with musicians on the indie side or on the the global impact side. I gotta maybe give him just a little bit more grace than I probably am right now.
I don't know. Maybe
they should just hire us. Maybe we should run it. I don't know.
I'm not sure about that, Mike. I hear what you're saying.
Too nice, Mike.
I agree. Like I don't think we should judge him on the words that he's chosen. I think there's clearly, like as Kirk was saying, I think there's clearly a move to try to categorize music as part of content ecosystem or whatever, and to make it part of that whole thing, which I think is negative for artists because it devalues in the wording, it devalues the art to something that does potentially cost close to zero because, creating a reel on Instagram, whatever, is not an expensive thing to do for most people. But I think we should judge him on his actions and the actions of Spotify and how they are treating artists and the steps they're taking, from a year ago, 2 years ago, in terms of how, not only how they are treating artists, but how they are paying artists, that the new things they're bringing in, are they beneficial to artists on the whole? Sure. Well, some of the key things they've brought in haven't been. It's not that Spotify is not working for many artists. It is. It's a very good platform to be a part of. But the trajectory right now is not a positive one for artists. At every point they are trying to squeeze artists with things like discovery mode and the cap. You have to reach like 1,000 streams a month or whatever to get paid.
Yep.
And there's a whole, or you look at any ambient playlist now on Spotify and they're just full of essentially, own label music, if you want to call it that.
Right. Yeah. One guy.
And that would be such, from my perspective.
467 different monikers. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And it's like, hey, an easy thing that they could do is say, we're not going to do that anymore. We're not going to just go to Epidemic Sound and buy out a whole bunch of music and pop it on there or get it for a much lower royalty rate. We're going to support actual artists and put up real music on these playlists. And that would be, imagine the positive PR within just the ambient sphere if they did that. And, I think one of the reasons people are so, happy with Amazon right now, which is such a bizarre thing to be saying, is that they're, on the big playlists, on the big stations, it's real music. It's people like us. And it's like, okay. Yeah. And I would not be surprised if more and more people start moving across just as listeners to those kind of places, because they're like, hey, I want to listen to stuff that has been intentionally created as art rather than essentially content production music. And there I am making that kind of distinction. But I think there is a little bit of a distinction there in terms of the intent and also the perception of the music from an end kind of listener.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, this might be the sort of topic or just even, it won't be the last time that we're talking about Spotify. I know that much, but we'll see if there in the coming months, if there are any repercussions or any further developments in that one. But I do appreciate your guys' thoughts on where it currently stands. And yeah, I am grateful that for those of us in this circle and for everyone part of the All Ambient family and beyond, that we are not making content, that we are making art. We are creating music, and we know that the cost is not near zero, but the cost is in fact very worth it to create what we do. And so that's my cutesy little way of closing that one up. I'm glad that we do what we do, and let's keep doing it. So there it is.
Yes, sir.
Good stuff.
Awesome. Grateful for you guys. We'll see you next time.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to the All Ambient podcast. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you can catch every conversation we have with all these incredible people who share the same passion. I'm looking forward to the next time, and I hope you are too. Can't wait to see you then, and until then, have an incredible day. Here's hoping this music and the heart behind it makes your day and life that much better. We'll see you next time.